45 years ago, a boy bought a comic book, and then he bought another one, and then another one, and then that boy became a man, and that man's brother had children, and that man's nephew also became a man, who then met another man, and they saw the first man's basement of now over 40,000 comic books. We are those men. This is They Call Me Uncle.
Welcome to Uncle's Basement Videos. where we're too old to dance. Today's guests include Carter and myself, Mason, and this is Uncle. Anyway, he collects things.
This is okay. This is good. We need to get the giggles out.
Yes. Okay, let me try. I just need the first words.
Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Carter. Hello. Welcome to our panel today. This panel is called How It Started. My name's Morgan. Everybody calls me Uncle. This is Mason. He's a talented artist. He owns a Tombstone art and tattoo studio up in Uri, Wyoming. You'll have to look that up because you've never heard of it. This is Carter. He's a talented writer. And he also does audiobooks for a living. I'm into software, but mostly I'm into collecting. We're sitting down here in my basement. We're surrounded by about 37,000 collectibles. Most of them are comics, some are magazines, there's statues, action figures, trading cards. Kind of wish I'd have collected trading cards because they take a lot less space. We decided to do this panel. I was talking to these guys and I said, with this coronavirus crap going on, we're probably not going to Comic-Con anytime soon. We've been to a few, I think a dozen or more, and we talked about, we could take all these and we could have our own booth and we could sell stuff. Mason does original art that we could be looking at and selling, stuff like that. We got talking about the collectibles, and I have a closet we call the vault, and it is full of statues, all comic related, things like that. Well, I didn't know these guys hadn't seen the vault, so I opened up the vault and let them rummage a little bit, and they're like, oh, you can't get rid of this stuff. This stuff is way too cool. Yeah. The reason I have so much is I've never gotten rid of anything. And so we're sitting here surrounded by all this cool stuff. Mason said, why don't we go through all this stuff? Yes! And share it with people and share it with us, because we've never seen it before. And we thought it would be super cool. So thank you for sharing this with us. Absolutely. We're all from Wyoming. If you know anybody from Wyoming, they have a tendency to tell stories. Well, they have these, everybody tells stories, and you never know if they're true or not. I always tell them stories about the collectibles. And with all the superhero movies coming out, these guys will hit me up, or Mason's sister, and they always want to know, well, how is it different from the comics? What we're going to do is we're going to talk about everything from movies, comics, magazines. It was really easy for us to make a list of topics. And so today, though, it's going to be, how did it start? Back in the 60s, yes, I'm that old, my mom worked at the Paramount drugstore in Lyman, Wyoming. Building's not even there anymore. Well, they got a comic stand. One of the things they do in the magazine and comic book industry is if the magazine or comic doesn't sell, they tear the cover off of it. They turn in the covers for credit towards their next order. And then they just throw the comics away. That's why the older comics, if they didn't sell, there aren't a lot of them because they got thrown away. Well, my mom would bring them home, and me and my dad and my brother, Mason's dad, would sit and read comics all the time. That's what really got us into comics. Now, I don't have those because when we were done reading them, we'd throw them away because the covers were gone. That started us, me and my dad and my brother were all really into comics. So the closest place we could go to buy new comics was Evanston, Wyoming. And they had a drugstore and a dime store. And all of my allowance went to buying comics. Pretty much all of those comics are here in the basement in boxes. And we're going to be pulling those out. We're going to be talking about those on future panels. So what we decided to focus on today was that first purchase I made with the money from my first job. When I was 12, I went to work for Bradshaw Auto Body, which happens to be my uncle. And I got $20 a week. And back then, they didn't care how old you were. If you wanted a job, you could get a job. It wasn't considered child
labor.
Child labor?
labor.
It's not child labor. And if you lived on a ranch, they just call it chores. You still get paid. So anyway.
It's like short for child labor, chore.
Chores.
Cool.
So I'm 12 years old, and I got my own money, and the grocery store started carrying comics. The grocery store in Lyman. It's also gone. Lyman had 2 grocery stores at the time. Now they have none. I go down to the grocery store, and I got my money. I'm looking through the comics, and some I had gotten in Evanston, but this one right here, X-Men number 97, was the first one I bought off the shelf. And this is actually the X-Men 97 that I bought back in 1975 with my money from my job. Now, I took it home and I read it, and it was so cool. You know, I had been reading stuff, but the X-Men hadn't really hit my radar. The original X-Men, I don't think the comic store I went to in Evanston or the dime store carried X-Men because I wasn't familiar with them. But the artwork on this, on the cover, really grabbed me. Characters I was totally unfamiliar with, so I took it home and I read it. Now, something that's really important about this issue, so Dave Cockrum did the art, and all these comics you're looking at, he was the main artist. But this introduced the Shi'ar. This introduced Lilandra. This was a really critical comic, and it really got me collecting. Now, what's cool is I went back to the store after reading it a few times and rummaged on the shelf. The most fortunate thing happened. This is Giant Size X-Men number 1. This is not the one I bought off the shelf. That one got read a lot and damaged, so when I lived in Denver, I traded it to a dealer and kicked in some money and bought a better copy. The reason this one's so important, this is the first appearance of the new X-Men, and these are the X-Men that everyone today is familiar with. This is where Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Storm, they came into the picture. Thunderbird was also there. Sunfire was in there. Banshee, who some of these guys didn't make the cover, but it was a completely international team. This was a great issue, but I also got this one. This is X-Men 94. Now, 94 is the first appearance of the new X-Men in the series. So the Giant Size was their first appearance as a team, then this is in the series. These two are 2 of the most valuable comics I own. So it was really fortunate that I picked up 97. I went back and got these other 2. Again, the artwork was fantastic. They introduced you to these new characters. It was a really cool time for comics. What's funny is 95, I didn't find until years later. I didn't find it in Evanston. I didn't find it in Wyoming. I bought this, I think, in Fort Collins, Colorado, while I was going to college. 96, I did find in Evanston, Wyoming. I remember getting it, but I wouldn't have paid attention to it if it wasn't for 97. The comics from this time were very memorable. Not only the art, but the writing. Hollywood, if you're listening, here is the movie you need to make. You take X-Men 97. That introduces the new X-Men. It introduces Havoc. It introduces Lilandra in a really cool way. The artwork from it by Dave Cockrum. The spaceships looked like nothing we'd ever seen before. They weren't your usual rockets. The backstory's fantastic. So 97 would be where you'd start the movie. In 98, the X-Men are captured. Again, these are the new X-Men. They're captured by the Sentinels. 99, they're in space. And then 100, that Mason has, the new X-Men battle the original X-Men. So you've now introduced everybody to the original and the new. There's some reveals in that one that are just fantastic. A little bit of a spoiler. So you've all seen the movies with Wolverine, and the claws come out from between his knuckles. Well, that's not where they were in the comics. In the comics, he had housings on the back of his hand. The scene that was so cool was the Sentinels have got the X-Men captured, and they escape because Wolverine pops his claws, and Banshee turns to him and says something like, "We didn't know those were part of you." They thought it was part of his costume. And so that big reveal is how they escape. The cool part is they have the battle. What Wolverine does to Jean Grey is really cool. So then they escape the space station they're on, but the shuttle they're in is damaged. And as the shuttle is re-entering Earth's atmosphere, Jean Grey has to push, and she's known as Marvel Girl during this time. She has to push the X-Men to safety, and she pilots the shuttle down. And in this issue, 101, Jean Grey reappears from the underwater as the Phoenix. So in these brief issues, 97, 98, 99, 100, and 101, they set up some of the best X-Men stories. The Sentinels were really good through all these, really good villains. Trask is in there, really great villain. It gave you all the action, adventure, and drama you could want. It set up the Shi'ar Empire, which would come later, and really it created the Phoenix, which leads to the Dark Phoenix saga, which ends when the Dark Phoenix and the Shi'ar Imperial Guard have an encounter on the moon. We're going to talk about some of that in a panel on the X-Men. I just wanted to point out that if you wanted to know what movie to make, that's it right there. Make that movie. I've said that forever.
So just curious, where would First Class be in any of this story? Or is that just a totally tangent timeline universe where they're going on?
First Class, in a way, was kind of a reimagining.
Okay. Because I remember them having Banshee.
They really did it as creating
or having
the X-Men. It was like an origin movie. Like Banshee, one thing that's interesting about him, he joined the X-Men in Giant Size number 1. But Banshee was an existing character. Some of the characters in this were created for this. Wolverine already existed. His first appearance was in the Hulk. Banshee had already appeared, I think, as a villain. Sunfire.
Okay.
He was in this, but he only stayed for one episode. And Thunderbird, he was created for it. I believe Nightcrawler was created right here in Giant Size number 1. I think Storm was. I don't recall, and Colossus. I don't recall any of them before Giant Size number 1. Banshee and Wolverine already existed.
And did their costumes change? The original X-Men's costumes change during that one as well?
The original X-Men had changed already.
Okay.
Now, this is interesting about the X-Men is before this Giant Size number 1 came out and before 94 came out, they were doing reprints of old X-Men comics. They weren't doing original stuff. They were going to be canceled. Somebody rolled the dice and said, hey, well, let us take a crack at it. And it went on to become one of the most popular comics that Marvel did. But it was about to be canceled, is my understanding. Now, one of the things that's been really fun about collecting is it took me to some really nice comic book stores, and it took me to some scary parts of town in cities.
Real heart of darkness there.
That I have never gone back to. But a lot of my collection came from comics I bought in Wyoming growing up. When I went to college, I also had a subscription to a lot of Marvel comics through junior high and high school. In college, I would mail order stuff, and it seemed like everything I was getting was from Mile High. After college, I moved to Denver, which was during the 80s. Mile High had multiple stores, but Denver had a lot of comic book stores, and I rummaged through all of them. The only one that was kind of in a bad part of town was actually one of my favorites. It was called All in a Dream. It was my favorite because Ray, and I only remember his name was Ray, he did a hold slot for me. That's how I got introduced to hold slot. He gave me a big discount, and he was a really cool guy that we would talk about comics. He would tell me backstories. And so his customer service and his friendship really kept me going back, even though it was on East Colfax and kind of a sketchy part of town. So I would park as close to the building, scurry in, hang out with Ray, get my comics. Batman came out during that time, the first one with Michael Keaton. We talk about that for hours. It was so much fun, and that's kind of what we are trying to convey with this. Now, after college, with each job, I had to travel for work. I actually went to Chicago and went to some really cool comic book stores. One of them was owned by an artist, but I never heard who it was. I just remember lugging a whole box of comics through the airport, taking it on as carry-on because it weighed a ton.
Nice.
Down in San
Jose.
Really? I was in San Jose.
He was totally guessing.
I found this fantastic comic book store. I bought a whole long box, which holds about 250 comics. So I asked the owner, I said, okay, if I fill this box, will you mail it to me? And he said, sure. And so, it was really cool meeting all these store owners. They were all comic book collectors like me. I did meet one in Las Vegas he was a comic book reader. He said if he didn't need to sell comics for a living, he'd just give them away. He just loved to read them. And he was a really funny guy. Him and his friends were all there reading comics and talking about something. And out of the blue, he asked me an odd question. And I said, I hate to tell you, but I'm a redneck from Wyoming. I don't even know what a metrosexual is. So he explained it to me. It was really funny because I had no idea, but I go back to his store every time I was in Vegas. There was another store in Vegas that was really good. Had really good inventory, really nice setup. I'd go to it a lot, pretty much up and down the Wasatch Front. I tried to go to every comic book store around. There's a place in Salt Lake. When eBay really boomed, Pete down in Salt Lake, he had this back room and you had to go get the key and there was no organization to it at all. So it was like treasure hunting. And I would thumb through there for hours and you'd find something you were looking for and it's like, yes. And you go up and then you'd haggle on price with Pete. And Pete would tell these stories that were just crazy. And Pete was so much fun. But then Pete discovered eBay, got him a computer, and he discovered eBay, and he sold all of it.
Whoa.
He sold it all. And I'm like, dude.
Dang.
And so I haven't seen Pete for years because he didn't have comics anymore.
Became a billionaire.
I don't think so.
Bummer.
And I had a hold slot at End Zone Comics over in Clearfield, Utah for years. Before that, I had one in Ogden, and I really liked that guy, but he got married and his new wife was like, you are not selling comic books for a living.
Aww.
So he had to go get a new
Sucks.
job.
Killed the dream.
So I
Killed
switched
it.
to End Zone. I always liked going in and visiting with Big John. Then in about 2010, I stopped collecting. But in that time span and through all those cities and stores and eBay and stuff like that, I accumulated right around 36,000 items. And it's funny because your great-grandma called me one day. My grandma, his great-grandma, Luana, loved yard sales. And she would go yard selling. Heaven help me if she found comic books because she would call me and want me to... we're in Utah right now. She would want me to drive up to Lyman, get these comics she'd just found. Oh, I couldn't tell her that.
Don't we all have that one relative?
They weren't worth the gas.
They're looking out for you, but
they are.
they're just.
I found a comic thing. You like comics?
And there was no picture phones back then, so you couldn't take a picture with your phone and send it.
Yeah. Who did the artwork, Grandma? Trying to explain that over the phone.
Read the front cover for me, top to bottom.
There's an imperfection on page 7 that makes it priceless.
So this is the accumulation of all of those adventures put into one.
Pretty much. The house we used to live in, this collection filled the whole basement. So we had to get a bigger house, and it took
or sell the comics. And that was...
We got a bigger house.
One of them's a resounding hell no. Yeah, so get a bigger house.
But
Moral of the story, kids.
Bigger house, divorce, sell the comics.
Yes. And his wife's pretty fly, so
Yes.
divorce wasn't happening.
Yep. No, bigger.
We
Bigger
love Karen.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to start with Carter.
Okay.
Yes.
I know what Carter collects because he had just reached number 1,000.
Yeah.
Go, Carter.
I collect movies. I collect oddities, rarities, anything that makes me take a second glance. And I fund it almost entirely with plasma donations. Yes, I literally allow strangers to jab me in the arm with a needle just so I can afford B movies. Yes. To quote one of the lesser Weezer songs, screw rehab, I love my addiction.
And what's been really fun is
Bravo.
every Thursday, the three of us, and sometimes my son, and sometimes other people, come and watch movies. We'll watch one tonight when we're done doing this. There is nothing funnier than introducing these two guys to movies they haven't seen, but maybe heard of, and watching them laugh. I had no idea Time Bandits was so funny.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen it several times. Zardoz was way funnier than it should have been.
They didn't mean that, though.
Barbarella is...
Oh, man.
We still got to catch Mason up, but me and Carter watched it, and I think that's the most I've heard you laugh.
Barbarella was a time.
Oh my gosh. That was fun.
Just that one scene. I'm trying not to mention it.
We'll do
Yes.
a panel on those kind of movies. We have a lot of good stuff to go over. How about you, Mace? What do you collect? I can tell you a few why he's thinking. For a little while, he got into Warhammer 40K. Not playing the game, he was building little cityscapes.
Yeah, like the models or like the miniatures and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I'm really good at not finishing anything. That's what I collect.
Word.
Unfinished projects.
So I'm more of like to build things. I like to draw stuff and to paint. I collect art supplies, honestly. Well, I still do buy a lot of stuff. But instead of buying so much stuff, I try to make some stuff.
Part of why we're doing this is some of the things he's created we're going to be showing you as we talk about different topics. Today, it seems like we talked a lot about the X-Men, but it's because that's what really kicked this off. But we're going to do a whole panel just on the X-Men. I know Mason's favorite. I lugged an action figure across Europe and some of the Middle East for him.
I have it in the box.
I have a painting
Mint.
that I'm really excited to show, but we have a couple panels we got to do before we can do that.
We don't trust you that much yet.
Yeah. One of the things we used to do when I was in junior high, we would pick who we would cast for a movie. For our next panel, we're going to talk about Iron Man. Iron Man's one of my favorite characters, has been since the 70s for sure, maybe the 60s. The three of us have all taken time to cast Tony Stark, Jim Rhodes, Pepper Potts, Happy Hogan, and the Mandarin. Now, I'm not saying they did a bad job on the Marvel movie, but I wanted to take...
Mandarin, maybe.
Well, there is that. And we were talking about this. I was telling him, trying to cast the X-Men in junior high, and so we were talking about it, and we don't want to do it like a poll. We don't want to limit ourselves in any way. So these guys have had free reign, just like I have, to pick anyone you want. Living, dead, historical figure, doesn't matter. It's just for fun. I've already got my picks worked out, and it was really fun going through the process and thinking about why is that character one of my favorites? What kind of criteria or requirements did I have if I was casting? And so next time, we're going to talk about Iron Man, and we're going to reveal our pick and kind of our reasoning and maybe mention some things they've been in. So you'll see that next time.
This is just an introduction and just testing the waters a little bit.
More importantly, testing the mic.
We're not letting this be an unfinished project.
Yes.
We're doing it right now.
Doing
Yeah.
it in the basement.
Doing it in Uncle's basement. Yeah.
You can't do that.
We did it.
We did it. So, Mace,
Yeah.
So are you gonna do the introduction?
I don't know if you want me to do the introduction. if you want me to.